I remember the heat clinging to the asphalt that day. It was Flag Day in Havenwood, a small, proud town where the air usually smelled of cut grass and old promises. I wasn't there for the parade. I was there because of a memo marked Critical Integrity Review. Precinct 42. My name is Arthur Davies. To the people of Havenwood, I was just an old black man in a slightly too nice blazer, perhaps a forgotten veteran enjoying the local spectacle. They didn't know I spent 40 years of my life on the federal bench, the last 5 dedicated to oversight commissions for electoral integrity. I was assessing the health of local democracy. The mission was simple: observe the current administration's conduct during the pre-election cycle, assess transparency, fairness, and adherence to civic duty. I found a quiet spot near the back of the square, leaning against an old oak tree, watching Mayor Hayes puff himself up on the temporary stage. He was classic small-town power: slick hair, expensive suit, sweat glistening under the midday sun as he talked about community values and respect for tradition. I had seen men like Hayes my whole life, men who confused loudness with leadership and power with impunity. He was reaching the crescendo of his speech, praising the spirit of American service, when he decided he needed a visual aid. He scanned the crowd, looking for someone easy to utilize, someone who wouldn't push back. His eyes landed on me. I knew that look. The moment his gaze locked onto me, his face shifted. A subtle, calculated dismissal. I was old. I was black. I was positioned away from the donors and the local elite. In his mind, I was either invisible or at best disposable stage dressing. He pointed, smiling that wide fake politician's smile. "Sir," he boomed, his voice echoing off the brick buildings. The gentleman in the back, the one enjoying our shade, perhaps a little too much ease today. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter went through the front rows. I stayed put, my hands resting on the silver handle of my cane. I didn't need to move. He needed to learn respect. "Come up here, sir," Hayes insisted, beckoning sharply. "You look like you've seen a few wars, maybe even fought in one. Let the people see what real American dedication looks like." I had planned to keep my profile low, but I couldn't ignore a direct request in front of 300 people. I pushed off the tree and walked slowly toward the stage, the heavy silence of the crowd following me. My steps were deliberate. Every tap of the cane was a reminder of the shrapnel I carried from Korea, not just a sign of old age. When I reached the wooden steps, he didn't offer a hand. He waited, impatient, tapping his foot. I mounted the platform. The mayor didn't shake my hand. He didn't ask my name. He put a patronizing hand on my shoulder, squeezing too hard, pulling me forward like a child. "See, folks," Hayes said to the microphone, radiating false camaraderie. "This is the backbone of our country. A man who put in his time. Maybe now he's enjoying his golden years, taking it easy, collecting that government check he earned." He paused, waiting for applause that didn't materialize immediately. Then came the knife, quietly, but amplified cruelly by the sound system. "Tell me, old-timer?" Hayes leaned close, his breath smelling faintly of cheap cologne and entitlement. He dropped his voice, clearly intending it to be a private joke for the inner circle, but the microphone was right there. "With all that wisdom you've accumulated, just sitting around waiting for your Social Security, do you even remember which way the polls open on Tuesday?" The insult was precise. It was about my utility. It was the swift, toxic assumption that an elderly black man, a veteran, was nothing more than a burden, intellectually diminished and waiting for charity. The crowd reaction was split. Some snickered nervously. Others looked down, embarrassed. The insult landed deep, a familiar ache of targeted dismissal. But Arthur Davies, the man, didn't flinch. Justice Hawthorne, the judge, was already analyzing the breach. Hayes pulled back, satisfied with his joke. He patted my arm, then waved me off the stage, dismissing me entirely. All right. Thank you for your service. Now let's get back to matters that require a bit more current intelligence. I walked back down the steps. The world outside saw a humiliated old man retreating. The world inside my head was calculating the precise moment of systemic failure. He just violated the oath of public service on 3 separate counts, I thought calmly, one of which directly pertains to voter intimidation and classist language aimed at diminishing a demographic critical to the election structure. I reached the safety of the oak tree again. I didn't leave. I simply stood there, waiting for the mayor to finish his empty rhetoric about respect and community. As Hayes finally finished and the applause began, I pulled out my wallet. It contained my veteran ID, yes, but nestled behind it was a small, embossed card, much heavier stock than the others. It was my active federal oversight badge, issued by the Integrity Task Force. I looked at the card, then back at Mayor Hayes, who was now basking in the adoration of his sycophants. The mandate was clear. Should any public official engaging in or supervising electoral proceedings commit an act deemed prejudicial, discriminatory, or intimidating against any citizen based on race, class, age, or service status, the immediate nullification protocol shall be initiated and documented. I took my pen and flipped the card over to its blank backing. I wrote 2 words on the card, clear and sharp. Hayes. Nullified. I pulled out my secure satellite phone, a device disguised as a chunky old flip phone. I didn't dial a number. I pressed the designated preset sequence. A clipped voice answered instantly, bypassing all pleasantries. Status check, go. I kept my voice low, blending with the receding sounds of the parade music. Arthur Davies, Oversight Designation Alpha 7, I stated clearly, watching the mayor shake hands and smile. We have observed a catastrophic failure of civic integrity by the presiding municipal authority, Ronald Hayes. Violation documented at 14:17 hours. Flag Day ceremony. Public discrimination. Targeted humiliation of a protected class and breach of conduct. The incident is fully recorded on my body camera feed. Designated file H42 CO1. I paused, letting the magnitude sink in. Initiate Protocol 3, immediate deployment of the investigative unit, and ensure that the federal documents regarding the ballot recount scheduled for next week are frozen pending review. This entire local election cycle, I concluded, the sentence hanging heavy in the warm air, is compromised. I closed the phone and slipped it back into my blazer pocket. Hayes was still laughing. He had no idea he hadn't just insulted an elderly veteran. He had just torpedoed his own career, invalidated his entire local government, and placed himself under the direct scrutiny of the highest federal court oversight body. I adjusted my blazer, the quiet, heavy weight of the federal badge feeling cold against my chest. My first act was complete, but the real work, the public reckoning, had just begun. I needed to ensure that when the hammer fell, it fell with maximum visibility and absolute, undeniable proof. The mayor's humiliation had been public. His downfall would need to be equally so. I needed to call my contact at the network to secure the full footage. Before morning, the evidence had to be untouchable. The mayor wouldn't just lose an election, he would lose everything he thought he controlled. The air felt heavy, not just with the humid summer heat, but with the collective, uncomfortable silence of the entire crowd. Hastings had finished his nasty little public performance. He had walked away from the podium with a smug, self-satisfied look, believing he had won the moment. He thought he had put the old black man, the nuisance, back in his place. He thought the audience saw me as merely a loud, disruptive vet, perhaps a little confused, certainly irrelevant. But as I stood there, rooted to the grass. I didn't see pity in the eyes of the attendees. I saw confirmation. They had seen his face drop the mask. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. Shouting is what the powerless do. Instead, I nodded once, slowly. That nod was not a sign of surrender. It was the sealing of a judgment. I turned and walked away from the event. My gait was steady. My spine was straight. I felt the 100 eyes burning into my back, watching the defeated old man leave the scene of his humiliation. I let them watch. Dignity is not something you beg for. It is something you possess. Even when a fool tries to steal it, the insult was not just personal. It was a symptom, a clear indication of the rot we were tasked to uncover. I drove the short distance back to the small anonymous rental house provided by the committee. It was purposefully unremarkable, a beige box with peeling paint. Exactly the kind of place a retired vet on a budget might rent. My cover was flawless. I closed the door behind me and leaned against the frame for a long moment, breathing deeply. The anger was a cold, quiet thing settled in my chest, more dangerous than any sudden heat. I walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table, running a thumb over the scar on my right hand. It was an old injury from my time overseas, but it always pulsed when I felt a deep injustice. I pulled the encrypted satellite phone from its hiding place beneath the loose floorboard. The phone was heavy in my hand. It was the only thing connecting Elias Vance, the quiet, humble veteran, to Judge Elias Vance, the retired legal mind with clearance that stretched across continents. I entered the secure codes and waited for the acknowledgement signal. The phone rang twice before a voice answered, smooth and professional, betraying no emotion. It was Agent Thorne, my primary contact and the acting chief monitor of this regional election integrity project. Status report, Judge Vance, she requested. She always used my full title on the secure line, regardless of the cover story. I bypassed the standard reporting protocol. Thorne, the observation phase is terminated, I stated, my voice level and hard. There was a slight pause on the other end. Agent Thorne knew that nullifying an observation phase was a significant escalation. It meant we were transitioning directly into investigation. Elaborate, Judge. Mayor Hastings provided sufficient evidence this afternoon to shift our focus entirely, I explained. His conduct during the public event was prejudicial, reckless, and displayed a profound lack of respect for the electorate, specifically using class and race as weapons of public ridicule. Was the incident recorded? It was a public gathering. I assume every cell phone in the park has the footage, though the mayor was unaware of my primary purpose here. I paused, letting the weight of my next statement sink in. His arrogance blinded him. That is precisely the kind of moral corruption that impacts fair election procedures. Recommendation? Thorne asked. This was the part of the job I was built for. Not the confrontation, but the cold, surgical response. We are no longer passively auditing the vote tabulation systems. We are now investigating the ethical fitness of the candidate himself, I commanded. I want immediate deep dives, initiated on all municipal contracts awarded by Hastings' office in the last 4 years. Financial audits, sir? Forensic audits. Pay close attention to any real estate zoning approvals, infrastructure bids, and tax abatements granted to known political donors. Start with the Community Redevelopment Fund line item. That is always where they hide the bodies. Thorne did not hesitate. It will be initiated immediately, Judge. We will mobilize the rapid response team remotely. I disconnected the call and placed the phone back under the floorboard. I sat there in the quiet kitchen, the scent of dust and old wood in the air. I closed my eyes, recalling the smirk on Hastings' face when he called me insignificant. They had wondered why I volunteered for this assignment. Why would a man who spent 30 years upholding the highest laws in the nation, presiding over cases that shaped the country, travel to a small, dusty, forgotten town to monitor a local mayoral race, because this is where the law truly lives or where it dies. Justice is not just defined by the grand decisions in marble buildings. It is defined by the basic, dignified treatment of every citizen in their local park, at their local ballot box, on their own patch of soil. Hastings had tried to extinguish my dignity in front of his audience. He didn't realize that in doing so, he had just invited the full weight of the federal oversight system into his meticulously constructed house of cards. He thought he was dealing with an old man and a folding chair. He was about to discover he had declared war on the foundation of the law itself. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The kind of work that unfolds quietly, far away from the cameras, deep in the ledgers and the filing cabinets. I needed documentation, evidence. I needed to find the mechanism that allowed a man like Mayor Hastings to think he was above the fundamental rules of decency and democracy. And I knew exactly where to start looking. It was always about the money. Always. I stood up and went to the back room, opening the single plain briefcase that contained my actual operational gear. Inside, nested between my official committee documentation and a small outdated laptop, lay the key to unlocking the mayor's dark secrets. A list of campaign donors he thought no one outside of his inner circle would ever bother to check. The humiliation was still fresh, but now it was fuel, and I was ready to ignite the fire. The crowd dissolved slowly. They didn't rush, they just shifted. Most people avoided my gaze entirely, staring at the ground or looking back toward the empty stage where the mayor stood moments ago. They had witnessed it. They saw an elderly man, dressed in service colors, publicly dismissed and racially categorized by the town's highest official. I felt the familiar heat rising, not of anger, but of deep professional disappointment. This was not a surprise encounter in a back alley. This was an orchestrated humiliation at a civic event dedicated to honor. I kept walking, slow and steady, leaning slightly on my cane. My spine was perfectly straight. In the decades I spent on the bench, I learned that true power does not rush to defend itself. It observes, it records, it waits for the record to be perfect. I noted the exact time of the insult. I confirmed the number of witnesses who flinched when the mayor called me a disruption. I logged the mayor's exact facial expression, the contemptuous curve of his lip. It was all evidence now. A woman, maybe in her late 60s, approached me quickly from the side street. Her face was tight with worry. She didn't apologize for the mayor. She apologized for the town. "Judge Elias," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "I am so sorry. He's been getting worse. He thinks this town belongs to him." She knew me, or rather, she knew the name I sometimes used when speaking briefly with local community organizers months prior. My cover was thin in certain circles, but strong enough for the mayor to never suspect I was more than a retired black man visiting family. I looked at the woman. Her eyes were tired. "Thank you, Mom," I said softly. My voice was steady, betraying none of the cold focus I felt internally. "Don't let him win, sir," she urged. "He suppresses everything. Voting, funding, contracts. We need change." "Justice comes in many forms, ma'am," I replied, giving her a small nod before turning away completely. "And often it is surprisingly quiet." I left the park grounds. I walked 3 blocks until I reached the back entrance of the modest extended stay motel I had rented. This place was intentional. It was out of sight, unremarkable, and financially anonymous, perfect for a monitor operating in deep shadow. I closed the door behind me and paused, leaning against the sturdy wood. The silence of the small room was a blessed relief after the noise and venom of the square. I took off the old Air Force cap. I removed my blazer, hanging it carefully on the back of the chair. Then I went to the single worn briefcase hidden under the bed. It was locked with a code only 3 people outside of Washington knew. I didn't rush the process. I punched in the numbers deliberately. 4388. The lock clicked open. Inside, resting on soft felt, were the documents that defined my purpose here. My identification card, still bearing the seal of the federal court system, though marked Retired Special Assignment. The directive was stamped across the top. Project Vigilance, Local Election Integrity Review. My official role was to observe all public conduct and procedural operations related to the upcoming municipal election, specifically targeting allegations of undue influence and voter suppression reported over the last cycle. I pulled out the bound logbook. The binding was dark leather, the pages watermarked. It was designed to be admissible in the highest court. I sat at the small, cheap desk. My hands were perfectly steady now. The judge had taken over. I wrote the date and the time in elegant cursive. Subject of Report, Mayor Robert J. Finch. Event, Town Civic Ceremony, May 15th, 1415 EST. Observed conduct, public demonstration of racial and class bias against a federal monitor operating under assumed identity of Mr. Elias Vance, veteran. Specific statement, recorded. I transcribed the exact lines the mayor had used, word for word, making sure to include the tone and the context of the interruption. I noted that the mayor's immediate reaction was to assume criminality or destitution rather than civility or service. The public degradation was secondary. The primary offense, in the eyes of the mandate I carried, was the demonstration of systemic bias that clearly influences his management style, and by extension, his management of the electoral system. This was not simply a personal insult. It was confirmation of a hostile environment created by the very official we were tasked to investigate. I closed the logbook. The record was clean. The evidence was irrefutable. I looked down at my hands. They were the hands of a man who had delivered final judgments that reshaped state law and ended careers of powerful men. Mayor Finch didn't just insult a retired veteran. He publicly interfered with a federal investigation. He invited the scrutiny of the highest court system. He had no idea that the disruption he dismissed was the very instrument designed to nullify his authority. My blood pressure, usually stable, was low and steady. This demanded cold strategy, not emotional retaliation. I reached for the second item in the briefcase, a small dark satellite communication device, encrypted and direct link to our project headquarters. It was time to update my supervisor, Director Harper. I needed official authorization to proceed to Phase 2, active monitoring and preparation of the nullification petition. The insult was public. The response must be absolute. I lifted the secure phone. My finger hovered over the contact button for the director. Mayor Finch's mistake was thinking that quiet people carry no weight. He was about to learn that sometimes the quietest men carry the heaviest gavels. I pressed the button. The line connected instantly. I waited for the clear voice of the director to answer, ready to detail the first official steps toward election nullification. Mayor Thompson thought he was invincible. The days following the insult were a spectacle of ego. He held impromptu press conferences. He did not apologize. He framed the incident as a misunderstanding. A good, hard-working local man, dealing with a difficult, politically motivated outsider. He knew Elias Thorne's history was private. He assumed the old man was powerless. Thompson spoke about protecting local values and not letting special interests dictate our town. I watched him on my small rented television screen. His face was flushed with the assurance of complete immunity. His supporters cheered every dismissal of my existence. They saw my silence as proof of defeat. They saw the suit I wore as a cheap costume. They did not know I was wearing the weight of the entire federal elections integrity mandate. My temporary accommodation was quiet, tucked away blocks from the city center. It looked like a cheap hotel room. It was, in reality, a secure satellite office. On the desk lay the affidavits I had been compiling for weeks, even before Thompson's outburst. The insult had been personal, but the violation of law was systemic. My initial mission had been to monitor the general election atmosphere, a routine check. What I found was far from routine. Thompson's administration had not just been sloppy, they had been intentionally obstructive. Voter registration applications from specific low-income districts vanished with suspicious frequency. Early voting center allocations were heavily biased toward precincts where Thompson polled strongest. The mayor's public racism, the humiliation he inflicted on me, was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a much larger rot. It was the policy made visible. I sat there, reviewing the evidence binder. Names, dates, addresses, testimony gathered meticulously by my small, highly trained team already embedded in the area. I had been insulted, yes, but I could handle that pain. What I could not tolerate was the weaponizing of local authority to silence entire communities. I picked up the secure phone. The connection was encrypted, end to end. "Chief," I said, my voice low. "Thorn here." "Elias, report." The voice on the other end was clipped, efficient. It belonged to the Chief Judge of the Sixth Circuit, the one who had assigned me this specific task. "The scope has changed," I told him. "We are no longer just reporting on irregularities. We are reporting on intentional interference, coupled with demonstrated open racial hostility by the acting official." A slight pause on the line. "Thompson's antics?" "Antics are minor offenses, Chief. This is grounds for nullification and mandated federal oversight of all future elections," I stated plainly. I did not have to explain the details of the insult to the Chief Judge. He knew the parameters of our civil rights mandate. Humiliation, when perpetrated by a public official, is violence against the system. "You have the necessary documentation confirming the pattern?" he asked. "I have the sworn testimony, the paper trail of the vanishing applications, and the public record of his behavior toward a federal officer disguised as a citizen," I confirmed. I felt a profound, heavy satisfaction. It was not revenge. It was restoration of order. The Chief Judge spoke carefully. "The moment that report leaves your hands, Elias, the local election authority is effectively suspended. Are you prepared for the firestorm that follows?" "I am prepared to enforce the law," I answered. The decision was mine alone now. When to submit the final affidavit? I could have waited until the voting was complete, allowed Thompson to win, and then challenged the outcome in court. That would have been the typical legal route. Lengthy, painful, but Thompson did not just break the rules. He used his official position to publicly degrade a citizen based on race and perceived social status. He had violated the very moral contract required of public office. Allowing the election to proceed, even for another hour, meant condoning his behavior. It meant accepting that institutionalized disrespect was tolerable. It wasn't, not anymore. I hung up the phone. I opened the document file labeled Preliminary Findings Executive Summary. The final section detailed the public incident. The mayor, utilizing his public platform during a civic ceremony, committed acts of racial discrimination and verbal abuse against a citizen based on the perception of that citizen's impoverished social standing. My signature was required at the bottom. The timestamp would be the moment the federal clock started running. My hand hovered over the signature pad. This was not just about canceling Thompson's win. It was about canceling his platform. It was about proving that the dignity of an old black man in a cheap suit mattered more than the ambition of a petty tyrant. I pressed down firmly, signing my professional designation, Elias Thorn, retired Federal Circuit Judge. The document converted to a secure, encrypted file, ready for immediate transmission to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division and the Sixth Circuit Court. I took a deep, steadying breath. It was done. The fuse was lit. All that remained was the boom. I stood up and looked out the window. Down below, Thompson was giving another speech, laughing with his staff. He was shaking hands, completely oblivious. He thought he had won the day when he insulted me. He had actually just signed the death warrant of his own political career. I reached for the transmit button. I hesitated only for a second, wondering about the sheer chaos I was about to unleash upon this sleepy town. It had to be done. I pressed the button. A small notification popped up on the screen. Transmission complete. Tracking number FIEA 21447. Now, the waiting began, but Thompson's waiting was almost over. Mine was just starting. I gathered my personal items. I would need to leave this location immediately. The operational phase was complete. The enforcement phase was about to begin, and I could not be here when the federal marshals arrived. I needed to secure the next phase of the operation, securing the ballot boxes. But first, I needed to make one more, very important call. A public call this time. A call that would expose everything. The mayor's panicked reaction was exactly what I had expected. A guilty man, afraid of accountability, always rushes to cover his tracks with the cheapest materials available, cash and condescension. Within 2 hours of my leaving the podium, my secure burner phone began to light up. The first call was from Marcus Vance's chief of staff, a sleek, fast-talking woman who sounded like she was reading from a mandatory corporate crisis handbook. "Mr. Thorne, the mayor is deeply apologetic for his lapse in judgment," she said, her voice overly cheerful, like she was offering me a free toaster. "He understands that emotions ran high during the civic event," she continued. "He would like to ensure that you feel compensated for any distress caused." Compensated, as if the humiliation of a lifetime of service could be packaged and paid for like groceries. She started listing offers. First, a formal private apology, delivered in his office, off the record. Second, a sizable donation in my name to the veterans charity of my choice, a number she suggested, $5,000. Third, a guarantee of local contracting work for my nephew's small plumbing business. No bidding required. They were trying to leverage my family to secure my silence. I let her talk, listening to the full scope of their attempted corruption. Every promise, every suggested payoff, every veiled threat to my reputation if I didn't accept the gracious offer. They were operating under the assumption that I was simply a poor, easily intimidated black man seeking a quick settlement. They hadn't researched the name Elijah Thorne beyond the local veterans registry. They didn't know they were trying to bribe the man who had overseen the landmark case on federal judicial conduct standards. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke. My voice was low, measured, and calm. The calm of a man who knows exactly how high the stakes are and precisely how far the damage will spread. "Thank you for relaying the mayor's intentions," I told her. "Please inform Mayor Vance that I accept nothing but justice." I hung up before she could reply, disconnecting the burner phone and placing it inside an evidence bag. The attempted bribery was now crucial supplemental material for the case. That evening, the quiet veteran became Judge Thorne once more. I met my team in the old law library, deep in the county administrative building. It was neutral territory, quiet, and thick with the scent of aged paper and constitutional law. There were 4 of us. Me, my former clerk, Ms. Jenna Rhodes, now a formidable young constitutional lawyer, and 2 election integrity analysts, Dr. Kim and Mr. Patel. We had been working in this town for 6 weeks, not just investigating Marcus Vance, but the entire network of voter disenfranchisement and dubious campaign finance practices that had sustained his political machine for years. "The video is clear, Judge," Jenna said, sliding her laptop toward me. It was a clean capture from one of the town's publicly owned CCTV cameras aimed at the podium. Racial epithets, clear use of the term disposable citizen, and public misuse of authority. And the audience reaction? I asked. Mixed, but damning, Dr. Kim replied. Several key witnesses, including 3 high-profile donors, have already expressed concern to our contacts. They are disgusted. Vance has alienated the very people who fund his operation. But the insult was only the surface. It was the public manifestation of the rot we were tasked to expose. Did the insult confirm your suspicions about his overall conduct? I asked them. Mr. Patel nodded gravely. Absolutely, sir. The language he used, the immediate dismissal of a black elder's standing, that is the exact mentality fueling the redlining of polling locations and the refusal to allocate fair resources to the West End. We spread the evidence across the heavy mahogany table. It was overwhelming. Pages detailing campaign contributions, mysteriously vanishing before federal audits. Emails confirming closed-door deals with land developers contingent on voter suppression efforts in historically minority precincts. And now, the videotaped humiliation of a decorated officer of the court. The mayor's moment of rage had not been a political error. It had been a confession. He had handed us the public proof of his systemic bias, confirming that his official capacity was entirely laced with discriminatory intent. The incident at the podium is not about my feelings, I stated, resting my hand on a stack of financial documents. It is proof of intent. It proves that Marcus Vance views his governance as the right to dismiss the fundamental civil liberties of those he deems lesser. And that is the foundation upon which he is attempting to secure this election. I looked at the young, determined faces of my team. They had put months of their lives into this operation, often working in shadows, gathering truths that Vance wanted buried. The investigation phase is concluded, I announced. We have moved into enforcement. I took out the final draft of the official finding, the Provisional Integrity Report for the 14th District mayoral election. It was a document of 73 pages. It detailed every violation, every instance of malfeasance, every ethical breach. I signed the document slowly, using the weighty official pen I always carried. Under the section titled Recommended Actions, I underlined the phrase, immediate election nullification and call for federal oversight of new electoral process. This was it, the silent, meticulous culmination of a lifetime spent ensuring the law was not just a suggestion, but a boundary. Marcus Vance had not just insulted a veteran. He had kicked the door in on a federal operation. He would wake up the next morning expecting to cruise to victory, believing his $5,000 had purchased my silence. But when he opened his emails, he would find the official correspondence from the Federal Oversight Committee, citing the newly filed Thorne Report. The sound of the gavel was about to echo across the city, not in court, but in the sterile silence of his own office. I looked at the clock. It was time to send the signal. Tomorrow, the town would learn what happens when you mistake dignity for weakness. The documents were finished. I had spent 2 weeks silently compiling the final report, not just on Thompson's obvious corruption, the land deals, and the inflated municipal budgets, but on his true character, revealed in that single screaming moment on the stage. That outburst had been the final, conclusive piece of evidence. It proved that he possessed the inherent bias and fundamental disdain necessary to subvert democracy. I sealed the final envelope, addressing it directly to the Chief Justice of the Federal Circuit Court. My work on the ground was complete. Thompson's humiliation of me had ironically completed my mission to expose him. I sat back in the deep leather armchair. I knew panic would be setting in right about now. The law, unlike local politics, moves slowly, but when it moves, it is unstoppable. Mayor Thompson, meanwhile, was starting to feel the chill. He thought the incident was forgotten. A quick win. His assistant, Jenna, came into his opulent office, her face tight. "Sir, the state auditors just called. They're requesting all receipts and internal meeting minutes regarding the new stadium project." Thompson waved his hand dismissively. "Standard procedure, Jenna, we're clean." "No, sir. This isn't the usual quarterly request. They demanded immediate access to the encrypted finance servers." Then the calls started coming from his donors. Short, sharp calls. His largest contributor, the CEO of Statewide Development, spoke just 3 words. "We're out, Thompson." Thompson felt the first real spike of anxiety. "Out? Why? We secured the zoning changes you needed." "The optics are bad, Mayor. Very bad. My board is nervous about associating with, quote, a volatile environment." Volatility, that was the polite word for Thompson's racism erupting publicly. He dismissed Jenna and called his chief legal counsel, Michael Vance. Vance picked up on the first ring, sounding breathless. "Thompson, tell me you didn't do this." "Do what, Michael? Insult some old black guy? Get real. This is politics." "This isn't politics, Thompson. This is the Fifth Circuit." Thompson leaned forward, gripping the phone. "Explain, Michael, now." "That man, the one in the blue uniform cap, Judge Silas Hawthorne." Thompson went cold. He remembered the name from dusty old news clippings. A giant of the bench, a legend of judicial scrutiny. "He retired years ago," Thompson whispered, trying to grasp the air. "He took a specific, temporary appointment 6 months ago. Federal Election Integrity Monitoring. For this county, because of the previous irregularities." Vance's voice was high-pitched, bordering on hysteria. "He wasn't asking for change. He was observing the integrity of your entire administration." Thompson felt the mahogany desk press into his chest. He had treated the federal check on his power like a vagrant asking for spare change. "He filed," Vance continued, sounding like he was reciting a death warrant. "He filed a comprehensive motion citing documented interference and creation of a hostile electoral environment. Attached to that motion is every statement you have ever made about minority voters, and yes, the video footage of you calling him a relic." I received the encrypted confirmation message on my secured terminal. The court was in session. Thompson was raging now. He didn't understand that he had crossed a line that power and money could not fix. He had attacked the foundation of the law itself in the person of its representative. He tried contacting me repeatedly, through intermediaries, through old government emails. Desperation leaked through every channel. "Thompson is offering a massive public apology," my former clerk informed me, calling from the D.C. office. "He wants to donate $5 million to a veterans charity of your choice. He begs you to withdraw the motion." I gave my former clerk a calm instruction. "The motion cannot be withdrawn. It is a finding of fact, not a personal lawsuit. Tell Mayor Thompson that justice is not bought, nor is it subject to negotiation." The public apology would have been theater. The donation would have been hush money. The issue was no longer Thompson's reputation. It was the integrity of the voting system he managed. Later that afternoon, the first federal mandate arrived publicly, shaking the county to its core. The circuit court had issued an emergency ruling. Due to the clear and present danger of compromised electoral fairness, the court nullified the county's current election calendar and halted all pre-voting activities. The entire election process was frozen, awaiting a full, mandatory federal takeover and forensic audit. Thompson's guaranteed re-election was gone. Not delayed, not challenged, but vaporized in a single judicial stroke. The local news coverage was immediate, frantic. The mayor's office refused comment. Thompson was locked in his office, his frantic shouting echoing down the empty municipal halls. He had traded dignity for a cheap insult, and now He was paying the price in absolute power loss. I closed the laptop. The quiet satisfaction was deep and final. He had mistaken authority for weakness. Now he faced the cold, neutral stare of true institutional authority. The worst was yet to come. But the reversal was complete. His political life had ended on that stage. The moment he spat disrespect into the face of a veteran, the storm hit swiftly, not the sudden violent kind, but the slow, inevitable pressure drop that crushes ships long before the rain starts. Mayor Thompson went silent. He issued a single, weak statement, blaming media interference and political enemies. It was futile. The video, the transcripts, the authenticated reports from the Election Integrity Commission, they spoke for themselves. The commission, led by my former colleagues and peers, worked fast. They didn't just look at the moment he insulted me. They looked deeper. They looked at everything. They uncovered irregularities that had been buried for years. Misappropriation of small-town funds, coercion of low-income voters, petty corruption disguised as local bureaucracy. The public humiliation had merely pulled the thread. The entire garment came undone. I sat in my library, miles away from the noise, reviewing the final draft of their findings. It was a document thicker than any phone book. It was the complete history of a man who believed the rules applied only to others. My assistant, Mr. Henderson, brought me coffee. He was watching the news silently on his tablet. "They're saying he might flee the state, Judge," Henderson whispered. I didn't look up from the page. "Thompson is an arrogant man, Mr. Henderson. He won't flee. He believes he can talk his way out of anything, even when the trap is made of reinforced concrete." I stopped at a specific section, the psychological profile. It outlined his pattern of aggression toward those he perceived as lesser, particularly minorities and the elderly. The mayor had destroyed his career for 5 seconds of perceived power. It wasn't just the nullification of the election now. The commission was moving toward recommending immediate criminal charges based on the financial and electoral fraud uncovered during the sweep. I felt a hollow ache. This wasn't justice. This was total annihilation. I had only asked for accountability. I had only asked for the rule of law to be respected. But when you pull a weed, sometimes the whole garden bed comes with it. Late that evening, a familiar name flashed on my secured line. It was David Stern, Thompson's chief legal counsel, a man I knew slightly from my DC days. I answered. His voice was strained, crackling with desperation. "Judge Elias," Stern began, skipping all pleasantries, "I'm calling unofficially, off the record." "Everything is on the record, counsel," I reminded him gently. He ignored me. "The mayor is willing to resign immediately, effective midnight tonight. He will sign a full statement, admitting to administrative oversight failures, and stepping down to ensure civic peace." I waited. "In return," Stern continued, "we ask that the Commission limits its findings solely to the election nullification. No criminal referrals. No public disclosure of the financial audits." The air in my study grew cold. He was asking me to compromise the core mission of the EIC. He was asking me to trade the truth for a quiet resignation. "Counsel, do you know what my job was here?" I asked, my voice level. "To monitor integrity, Judge, yes, but the damage is done. The community is suffering. Why destroy his life entirely?" His life was destroyed the moment he felt comfortable looking at a decorated veteran and calling him a slur on live television. I stated plainly. That moment revealed who he truly was, and that truth must be accounted for. Stern pleaded further. He mentioned Thompson's family, his small children, the decades of service, however flawed, to the community. I listened to every word. I gave every mitigating factor its due weight. Then I closed the binder on my desk with a heavy thud. "Counsel Stern, The law is not a bargaining chip, I told him. The law is a promise. Mayor Thompson broke that promise to his constituents long before he broke it publicly to me. You have the power to stop this full disclosure, Judge. I have the power to enforce the law, I corrected him. And the law demands that the fraud, the coercion, and the inherent corruption that tainted this election be fully disclosed, not for revenge, but for the future integrity of this town. I could hear him breathing heavily on the line, the sound of defeat. His resignation will be accepted, I said, but it will not halt the investigation or the resulting legal action recommended by the Commission. I hung up the phone. A weight settled on me then. The immense, tiring weight of final decision. I hadn't wanted to ruin a man, but I could not save a man who had proved himself fundamentally unworthy of holding power. The truth was, the moment Thompson had insulted me, he wasn't just insulting a random old man. He was insulting the office I once held. He was insulting the very concept of equal citizenship that my uniform and my robes represented. He had challenged the law, and now the law was answering. The EIC report was officially complete. All that remained was the formal announcement and the signing ceremony. I picked up my pen. The final recommendation was clear. Nullify the election results immediately. Appoint a caretaker council. Refer all findings regarding financial malfeasance to the State Attorney General's office for prosecution. I signed the document. The ink felt permanent, cold. Tomorrow, the headlines would scream. The political world would fracture. Thompson's career would be reduced to ash. And yet, sitting alone in the silence, I felt no triumph, only profound exhaustion. I knew that true justice wasn't about the mayor's downfall. It was about ensuring that the people of this small town, black, white, poor, and rich, could stand in line and cast a ballot, knowing their voice would be counted, not corrupted. My mission was almost over. I just needed to deliver the final word. I looked out the window at the peaceful darkness. The declaration was set for midday. I spent the next hours preparing my public statement, a precise, measured explanation of legal findings, stripping away all emotion. I would make sure that every voter understood precisely why their system had failed and how we were going to fix it. But first, there was one piece of unfinished business. I needed to make one last, required call to the Chief Justice of the EIC to confirm the deployment of the federal marshal assigned to secure the courthouse during the announcement. If Thompson tried one last desperate stunt, if he tried to physically stop the reading of the nullification, we had to be ready. I reached for the phone again, my mind already rehearsing the deployment codes. The game was over, but the safety of the field remained paramount. I wouldn't leave until the last pieces were securely in place. The final countdown had begun. I took the elevator up, riding past floors dedicated to civil liberties and constitutional law. I was no longer Elias Vance, the old man in the worn vest. I was Judge Elias Vance, retired but sworn, an officer of the court and a servant of justice. Today I wore a suit, tailored 2 decades ago, still sharp and commanding. It felt like putting on armor. The State Election Integrity Board met in a chamber lined with mahogany and portraits of stern-faced founders. They were waiting for me. They had read my preliminary reports, but they didn't know the full scope of the conspiracy, nor did they know the catalyst. I laid the binders on the table. They contained months of tireless work, evidence collected not just by me, but by a network of dedicated civil servants working silently across the state. I detailed the patterns of voter suppression, the intentional short staffing of precincts in historically black neighborhoods, the mysteriously missing absentee ballot applications, the fraudulent tampering with electronic vote tallies late on election night. This wasn't merely incompetence. This was calculated design, orchestrated from the mayor's inner office and filtered down through his campaign manager and local registrar. I spoke calmly, Clinically, I presented spreadsheets, recorded communications, and sworn affidavits from whistleblowers. The evidence, I stated, my voice steady, is overwhelming. The election results in this county are irredeemably compromised and legally void. There was a grave silence in the room. The chair of the board, a woman with decades of experience in public ethics, nodded slowly. She then pushed a file toward me. "Judge Vance," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "we understand the systemic failure. But this contains the specifics regarding Mayor Thompson's character and judgment. You were personally involved in the confrontation at the Civic Day event." I paused. This was the moment where the objective reality of the crime met the subjective pain of the injury. I described the stage, the crowd, the sunlight glinting off the bronze plaque dedicated to local heroes. I described the simple, honest question I asked about the veteran services budget. Then I recounted his reaction, the immediate dismissal, the sneering tone. He did not see a retired federal officer performing his duty, I told the board. He saw a prop, a nuisance, an obstacle based on my appearance and my age. He assumed that because I wore a cap and a slightly soiled jacket, I lacked the capacity for dignity or the right to demand truth. I leaned forward slightly. When a man in power believes he can strip dignity from the least powerful among him, with witnesses watching, he believes he is above all law, I explained. This moment, the public humiliation, was not just a side note of arrogance. It was the perfect behavioral signature of his deeper crime. He views the Constitution the same way he viewed me, something he could dismiss and step over without consequence. The chair closed her eyes for a brief second. "Thank you, Judge," she said. "Your report and your testimony are clear." The board adjourned briefly. The minutes felt like hours. I sat there, the weight of the past few months lifting off my shoulders, replaced by the heavy finality of the decision. When they returned, the chair stood to deliver the ruling. Based upon the documented evidence of systemic fraud, ballot tampering, and the orchestrated suppression of voter registrations, the State Election Integrity Board finds the recent municipal election in Thompson's County to be irrevocably corrupted. Her words echoed through the silent chamber. Effective immediately, the election is nullified, the office of the mayor is vacated, and interim governance will be installed pending a completely monitored, federally supervised special election. I didn't smile. Justice wasn't about smiling. It was about balance. The chair continued. Furthermore, given the scope and apparent intent of the operation, all findings, documents, and relevant testimony are being referred to the State Attorney General's office for immediate criminal investigation into conspiracy and election tampering charges against the former mayor Mr. Thompson and his key staff. It was done. The system had worked, slow and grinding, but powerful. I gathered my files and exited the building through the back entrance to avoid reporters already swarming the lobby. I drove out of the city and back toward the county line. The news broke on the radio instantly. Thompson was already issuing furious statements about a witch hunt and federal overreach. His words were shrill, desperate, and hollow. I pictured him in his office, the walls that felt so permanent now crumbling around him. He had been so obsessed with holding power that he forgot the basic moral requirement of holding it: respect for the people you claim to serve. I pulled off the highway and parked near the old town square, blocks away from where the Civic Day rally had taken place. I could see the front of the town hall, still draped in outdated celebratory banners. That stage, where he had dismissed me as a worthless, aging man who needed to go home and rest, now represented his ultimate undoing. Thompson's universe was collapsing, not because a powerful judge suddenly appeared, but because he failed to recognize that every single person, regardless of their attire, deserves inherent respect. He had mistaken my discretion for weakness, My silence for ignorance. He found out that day that sometimes the most unassuming person in the crowd is the one holding the scale of justice, and sometimes that person is just waiting for the exact moment of hubris to tip it. I sat there for a long time, watching the sun dip low over the quiet, reshaped town. The election was nullified. His power was gone. His insult had cost him everything. I finally started the engine. My assignment here was complete. But as I drove away, I realized something profound. The nullification wasn't the end. The real work, the work of healing the wounds Thompson had inflicted on the community and restoring faith in the ballot box, was just beginning. I still had a responsibility to this town. My report was filed. The charges were looming. But the dignity of the people still needed defending. I was heading home, but I knew I would be back. My commitment was to the Constitution, and that commitment didn't end with a verdict.